All right. Welcome everyone to CVI Now's live virtual event all about CVI and remote learning. If you're with us on our CVI Now parent group, drop a hello in the comments and feel free to post questions as they come to you. Captions are available if you'd like, but they're a bit delayed, about 10 to 15 seconds since they are live. I am Rachel Bennett, the Content and Community Manager for CVI Now, and I'm a CVI mom to Henry. We know that raising a child with CVI is really tough, and now we have to do it in the midst of a worldwide pandemic. We all have to adjust to a new normal, and this includes remote learning. Today, we'll hear from 3 educators who work with students with CVI that have a range of needs. These educators are creative, outside of the box thinkers who will speak briefly about how they've adapted to remote learning and some promising practices they use with their students. We have Megan Conaughton, a special educator and deafblind specialist. Megan is a preschool teacher in the deafblind program at Perkins School for the Blind. We have Emily Cantillon. She's a TVI who is Perkins Roman CVI range endorsed. Emily is also pursuing a graduate certificate in CVI at UMass Boston. She's a TVI for the community programs here at Perkins. She works with school-age students in public school districts. Ilsa Willems is a special educator and deafblind specialist who is also Perkins Roman CVI range endorsed. She is in the UMass Boston's TVI program, as well as pursuing a graduate certificate in CVI at UMass Boston. Ilsa is a deafblind teacher for Perkins School Community Programs, and she works with school-age students in public school districts. After their presentations, Megan, Emily, and Ilsa are here to answer your questions, ones that were already submitted and the ones that come up live. We have Allie here to help us moderate questions that come up live on the CVI Now parent group. All right, so excited to be here. So let's get started with Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan Conaughton. I'm a teacher in the deafblind program at Perkins. I've been at Perkins 12 years, and I've been teaching in the deafblind preschool program for the past 7 years. And currently 4 out of the 6 students in our preschool class have a diagnosis of CVI, ranging from phase 1 to early phase 3. And all of the students in our class, with and without CVI, have complex needs and profiles. So an individualized approach to remote learning was definitely key. For instance, I have a student who's phase 1, very medically complex with a mild hearing loss, little volitional movement. He uses switches and he uses whole, real, single colored objects. I also have a student who's early phase 3 who uses cochlear implants and is an emerging reader, and she uses speech and sign to communicate, and she also uses Mayer Johnson symbols for support. So during remote learning, I needed to find a way to work with all of my students, both individually and in group settings over Zoom. And I should say all the materials that I either sent home or recommended for home use were individualized for each student based on CVI, functional vision, and multiple dictionary assessments. And they were appropriate for each of them on an individual level. So it's not the case for all of the students. So bring up my presentation. So for remote learning in our deafblind preschool class, we did a mix of activities. We did group activities throughout the week, including Morning Circle, which was run very similarly to how we run it live, as well as a weekly music class, which was both a fun way for the students to interact and also practice turn taking and things like that. I did a mix of one-to-one lessons, including literacy and math. And I also had time for parent consultation and engagement. So some considerations for the group activities that we ran were my background and what I was wearing. I tried to have a very neutral background as much as possible and wear dark, solid color clothing. And the student setup, I encouraged parents to set up their student with a black background behind them and with as minimal auditory and visual distractions as possible. And obviously life is a real thing. There's going to be background noise. There's a lot of preschool age students on Zoom at the same time that have homes and families and siblings and pets. So one way I found to eliminate background noise, we kind of agreed with the parents that we would start everybody on mute, and with the parents' help and moderation, they would unmute their student when it was time for their turn so I could focus on them, but then they weren't being distracted by any noise in anybody else's home. And I also had to consider how to do choice making for a lot of the students that weren't quite ready for choices on a screen. So I came up with a mix of paper materials for those who it was appropriate for, as well as object representations for students who were object users. So for example, for our music class, we had our 4 song choices. And for one student, the Mayor Johnsons were appropriate for her based on assessment and her personal use. So she was able to make the choices either on the screen or on a paper printout. But then for some of our students that were object users and needed a simpler way to either make a choice or have an errorless choice presented, we sent a list of some suggestions for each song, such as using a monkey toy for 5 monkeys jumping on the bed, or even a pillow to represent the bed. But I always said to the parents, these are suggestions, use what you have and what makes sense to you and your student. And it worked out really well. It was a really fun experience for everybody. And it was a nice way to incorporate the group while still taking into consideration the individual needs of each student. So for one-to-one lessons, I used a few different formats. I used online format with physical materials to support, utilizing the unique learning system. So it's a great system for the student I was working with. We could work on a reading lesson, and it has a really nice simple white background and large black print with minimal images. So she could follow along right on the screen, but also in case she was having visual fatigue from looking at the screen a lot, I would also send a PDF version through the Google Classroom so she could print it and follow along at home. I used PowerPoint to adapt simple books, and I also made simple lesson plans for the parents to carry out offline. I also recorded some lessons for repetition and consistency for the students. So if I was doing a PowerPoint book, I would make the same recording of myself presented the exact same way with a lot of wait time. And that way the parent could just play it for the student at home without having to facilitate too much of it. So here's an example. One of my students working on reading, she was able to follow along on the screen, and Unique has now actually introduced this really great tool that you can follow along and either highlight specific words or underline. So if she got stuck on something, and if I was asking her to identify something in the picture, for instance, if I said, can you find the apple? And she was having a hard time with the array, I could use the circle to draw it and help her kind of zone in on exactly where she should be looking. And then for this student, the screen's black on purpose. This is how it was presented to him during our one-to-one reading session. So the screen would be black. I was just small in the corner, and I would read the story to him. And after I read each page, I would pause and I would give no more auditory input. And then it would switch to a simple image on the page that would slowly teeter back and forth. And I was able to go back and make it move again if I needed to, if he was having a hard time with the attention. And this student is a 3D object user. So this was more of a lesson for attention, just seeing if he would attend to the book, if he was reacting to my voice. So we worked on this all through the closure, and we're back right now. And it seemed to work well because we're working on the book live now. And he seems to recognize it even just as a familiar story that he's heard. So it worked out really nicely for him. So the promising practices I found with my remote learning experience were keep it simple. I wanted to utilize materials that are common and easy to find in the house. I don't want to make this any harder for parents than it already is. Keep it familiar. I wanted to incorporate familiar school routines such as morning circle or a reading activity with familiar home materials, because for a lot of students, home and school are 2 very separate places, and they don't want to learn the same way at home that they do at school. So finding a way to kind of blend that together and collaborate. Collaboration is key. I couldn't have done anything with my remote learning without the amazing support from my parents. So that is definitely one of the most promising practices that I found.
Thank you, Megan. Really, really appreciate that. Let's move on to Emily.
Hello, my name is Emily Cantillon, and as it was said, I'm a teacher for Perkins Community Program. I service about 50% of my caseload is students with CVI, so around 20 students or so. And they range from mid-phase 1 up to late phase 3, and an age range of 4 years old, and my oldest right now is 20 years old. So a wide spectrum. Let's get started on how I have been facilitating remote learning. So I provide consultation services, and these have been a huge during remote learning. So this has been provided through video calls, phone calls, emails, observations through video and teleconferencing, material adaptations, reviewing materials, staff and team trainings. So for me, when we first went into remote learning, very familiar with the teams and the teachers were familiar. So having the transition this September, a lot of my students were now in new classrooms, have new teachers. So a lot of dedicated time to staff training during this remote time for the new teachers. And then going through how are they going to present things? Let's break down each of your lessons. How can we make it accessible? What are the list of materials that you think might help I want to get the teacher's perspective? And then incorporate the parent as well and really say, here, I was talking with the teacher, let's have a discussion. What of these do you have at home? So having that consultation, that really deep collaboration is huge. And especially the observations, I miss my students so much. So just being able to set up a quick FaceTime or just being on a laptop on the side of a room has made a great difference. For my direct, I am providing either live video calls to teachers, parents, nurses, other specialists, and facilitating a lesson through coaching, or I'm providing recorded lessons where I go through step-by-step on how it would be presented and having, again, the teacher, the parent, the nurse facilitate that on their own time, and then also written lessons that go by step-by-step. So it's very individualized with each student's team on the best method of providing services and what is most beneficial to the student, really honing in on the IEP. These are the services, these are the accommodations. What is the best practice in this remote setting to provide the best services possible? So an example of my promising practices is whole team collaboration. When we get everyone involved, it really helps develop lessons that are meaningful and connected. If I am connecting with the speech therapist and mom, for example, about fall, or we're all using the same materials, that repetition, building that familiarity, making sure that the student has access to 3D materials if that's appropriate based on their evaluations and assessment results. So bringing in all available parties to make that connection, making it a real well-rounded lesson, I think has really been beneficial because it builds it up a bit more. You're not just getting it one time during a vision, it's then being embedded throughout the day, throughout multiple lessons. Preparing all individuals for the schedule prior to the lesson. So letting the parents, the nurses, the teacher, whoever I would be facilitating with, this is our plan, these are the steps, letting them know so they can prepare. And then also trying to help the student prepare. This is a very unfamiliar time, unfamiliar lessons. So letting them know of the schedule, either having the parent let them know of, okay, when you see Miss Emily, you're going to be doing these 3 things. And then when I start reviewing those as well. And then using previous assessment findings to develop the lessons, but then also using the current data from the remote lessons and from how they're doing. So really keeping track of, we're all trying a lot of new things during this remote time. So really keeping that data that this didn't work or this did work. And so helping myself keep track of those then helps the team and share our knowledge to really help the student get the most out of their lessons. An example of one of my written lessons is here. I would send these the materials. It identifies the hairbrush would be the student's hairbrush. If the student doesn't have a comb, the parent or student's comb. The PowerPoint that would accompany the lesson, and then the step-by-step procedure breaking down what you say, how long to wait, how many repetitions. So it's a step-by-step lesson. And I would provide this before virtual lesson. And this model I've also used as if the parent or nurse or teacher can't make a lesson, I'll provide this and they can do it on their time. So really having that flexibility. So here's an example of an adapted PowerPoint that I've made. The student that this was designed for is not a 2D student. So what this was for is more of a script for whoever is facilitating the lesson to make sure that we're all using the same language involving salient features so that they know and can say, oh, okay, right now we're talking about the handle. It's a long handle, using those identifying characteristics when you're verbalizing the material. So here is an example of, with the same hairbrush, how it would be done for a 2D recognition. Hairbrush is the target word. It's outlined in red. This would be student specific. So if the student's preferred color is green, highlighting it in green, using that data from assessments to really develop how your lesson is executed. And then again, that outline, using the outline to draw visual attention. I've also adapted books. So here is an example of if you give a pig a pancake. This student is a 3D student. So these are real objects that would then be a guide to whoever is reading this book, hoping one, as Megan said, gain some visual attention to the lesson, to the book, but also know what 3D object to pair with each page. And then for a 2D student, llama, llama, red pajama, I went through and took out the background. So it's really focusing in, the student really is drawn to characters of stories. So making sure the character pops, getting rid of the complexity, and then adding in a little bit else of the environment, the bed, really having that discussion of, oh, he's in his bed, connecting those things, bringing it back, really developing the lesson, making it deep and meaningful.
Thank you, Emily. Really appreciate all that you shared in those insights. We're now going to move to Ilsa.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ilsa. I'm a teacher of the deafblind. I work with Emily, so I'm also an itinerant teacher in the community programs. All of my students on my caseload, except just one student, has CVI, and my students range from 4 years old, I'm really bad with ages, to, I want to say my oldest is 17 currently, and they all have multiple disabilities, dual sensory loss, and of course CVI. So I'm going to continue on with what Emily was saying. There we go. Okay, my promising practices. So this is specific to during remote learning, of course. So number one is that I kept all my lessons very individualized, and this is exactly what you've been hearing from Megan and Emily. So continuing on with all of them, but basing all of my lessons on my students' evaluation and assessment data that I have from their recent CVI assessments. So keeping all their lessons very individualized, trying as much as I can to, of course, include all of their accommodations. I know that IEP accommodations were not necessarily written for during remote learning time. So some of the accommodations were difficult to implement during this time, but as much as possible, I'm of course implementing every accommodation that I can. And then third, again, like you've been hearing repetitively from Megan and Emily, collaboration is key. And during this pandemic time, I've had so much more collaboration from families than I usually might. And that's really, for me, been a big benefit, a big positive from all of this time that I've really enjoyed. So for my caseload, well, remote instruction means that suddenly everything was 2D, unless, like Emily was saying, and Megan, of course, unless you're presenting materials, unless families have things in the home, unless teachers are sending materials, unless they're also holding 3D materials. If you're just presenting something on the screen, it's only 2D. So suddenly during this time, students have this 2D curriculum, all these 2D lessons. And for my students, a lot of my students were not ready for 2D yet. For CVI, usually it's this lovely slow progression that we like from 3D to 2D. And it was, for a lot of my students, very sudden of 2D. So I wanted to share some of the lessons that I did for some of my students. So for those students that I thought were ready for 2D, again, based on their assessments, very individualized. We've been hearing a lot about adapted PowerPoint books. That's been one of my favorite things for my students that can do 2D to do, because that's been a really easy way to collaborate with the teachers. If I know that they're sending home books or reading a book, live on Zoom, then I want to make sure that my student has a copy, an adapted copy of that book with visually accessible images. And I'm going to choose those images based on what my student can handle, again, based on their assessment. Do they need photographs? Or can I, like Emily showed with Llama Llama, can I choose the picture of the book and just take out the background? Very specific with how I adapted the book. With PowerPoint, it's also so easy to add background, to add wait time. Do I want to record my voice, or do I purposely not want to, because that would be harder for them to hear and listen. So I want to more send it home, and the parents can choose how they want to do voice and looking at the same time, with my input on that. Purposely choosing the background, of course, choosing the array, things like that. Now that students are back in school, I'm still remote, but school's a little bit, now that my students are in school, it's a little bit easier to do remote teaching on my end, just because they have some of the materials that they didn't have when they were home. So now I can do some of my usual lessons, and I'm just guiding the TAs through my lessons. So they're my hands, basically. So that's been nice. I was able to do that with the parents as well, but just that material piece was sometimes hard. Another thing I did was creating task analyses and videos of different activities. I love doing this specifically for my students that I was working more on life skills and pre-vocational activities. So just gathering the mail, for example, a great, there's so many steps into that. O&M, for example, you're gathering the materials, but then you're sorting them, you're delivering, you have to get someone's attention to deliver it. All of the siblings in your house, you have to be able to, sign, a lot of my students signing hi and communicating with them and giving it to them. And, there's just so much that can go into that. So really digging deeper into it and guiding the parents into how they can help their child doing all those steps more independently. So that was really fun for me. So delivering the mail, how to sort laundry, how to set the table, all of those things. Or other how-to videos of how to create and utilize story boxes, how to create and use a light box. So again, everything was very student specific. But those are just some ideas, especially for my students who weren't quite ready for more 2D things, how I implemented more, trying to combine that 2D and 3D. But if you are more ready for 2D, and again, some of these might be repetitive, we all have the same ideas for ways to make this just a slightly bit easier for our students. Pinning the speaker during this, sorry, I'm talking about Zoom now, pinning the speaker. And again, like I said, it can make it slightly bit easier. It's not ideal, but because you still have some array, as we know, but it's just a bit better than that gallery view. That there's certainly a lot of complexity of array with that whole gallery view. Sometimes I've observed the students might have a one-on-one, but instead of it really being a one-on-one, there's lots of other staff on just to observe the student. which is great because I'm sure they're getting a lot of information. But then again, there's that whole complexity. So if someone's on just to observe, a nice easy thing is just having them turn off the video, for example. Like Megan was saying, if anyone's, you know, if it's not someone's term, having them muted, just to decrease that auditory. A really big thing for my students was continuously trying to make that connection between 2D and 3D as much as I can, trying to make sure that I can present them with the materials, those more 3D materials of what is being presented on the screen. Considerations for the home. I know Megan talked through a few of these already. So a couple new ones maybe. Using a consistent workspace if possible, so that the student is prepared when they go to this space, they know what's about to happen. They're about to have their, you know, their work time, their school time. Emily was mentioning that she had one student who was distracted by the laptop keys. So a quick, easy thing is that she had got black construction paper that she just put over the laptop in case anyone else is having is getting distracted by that, so that she could really focus on just the screen in front of her. Creating a schedule. I know a lot of our students are very overwhelmed by Zoom, and if Zoom or any other, whatever platform you're using, is all of a sudden turned on and they're all of a sudden being asked to focus on a lesson, they might kind of shut down a bit, you know, close their eyes, whatever their method of shutting down is. But if they are given a schedule, so they're a bit more prepared, they know Zoom is coming up in the day, then maybe it might go just a little bit better. It might be a little bit easier for them. Building in those visual breaks. We all know that our students need those visual breaks throughout a regular day anyways, but now that you're adding in so much more computer time, we're all visually fatigued with computer time, but especially knowing how difficult, again, just for my students, the 2D is already difficult. So adding in the 2D, adding in the visual fatigue, adding in the regular necessity for visual breaks anyways, there's just, you know, even a higher need than there usually is. And just making sure that the student has supportive seating so that they can really focus on just looking. They don't need to think about anything else. And then lastly, just some collaboration with the TVI. We love to collaborate with parents so much. So working together, it's again with Emily's idea, working together to make lists of related items at home. Emily had the great idea of if you know ahead of time, if the TVIs know ahead of time of what materials are in the home, then we can kind of gear our lessons towards that. So that again, like Megan was saying, we don't want you to have to go out to the store and buy more things. So we know what you have in the home. We can make lessons geared towards that and make themed lessons around all the different related materials that you already have in the home. Adapting school materials. If I know what the teacher is going to send home or what the student might see in the classroom, then I can adapt. I can make adapted PowerPoints if appropriate based on the book they're reading. I can try to adapt their worksheet or, you know, send a list of materials, like I suggested list of 3D materials to make connections to that 2D. The more I know about what they're doing in school, the more helpful I can be. Collaborating with parents. This has been one of my favorite things during COVID, is that now parents are more likely, at least for me, to tell me what their priorities are for their students. I've had a couple, like I called one family the other day. I was like, okay, these are, you know, these are my lesson ideas for their child. I went through my whole spiel. She, you know, relating everything to the IEP. She's like, honestly, the IEP does not matter to me right now because she's like, you know, she has other priorities because of, you know, her student is completely remote. Her child is, and, you know, so I was able, you know, I still need to care about the IEP for legal reasons, but now I know what her priorities are. And as a TVI, which is what I love, I can be very flexible in my lessons. So I can obviously keep the IEP in mind, but I love knowing what her priorities are. I want to make sure that I'm, you know, most beneficial to the student and to the family and to the team. So if I know what the family's priorities are, then perfect. I can gear my lessons to exactly what they need to benefit everyone. And then parent prep, this was already brought up as well, but sharing a list ahead of time. That's something as a TVI, what one of our roles would be to families. If we can share a list ahead of time with our lessons, and if you could have the materials ready, if you have those in the home, we would make sure you have those available to you in the home. Then the student, again, could really make that connection between the 3D and the 2D, just again, to really aid in that understanding of what is being presented on the screen.
Thank you so much, Ilsa. That was wonderful. Emily, Ilsa, Megan, thank you for sharing all of your insights and knowledge and expertise. Listening as a parent myself, it was so helpful, specifically like, oh yeah, that's why the laptop didn't work. You know, the keys were totally bothering Henry. That's why I had to move to the iPad. All these little things that make such a big difference for our kids in this big change of remote learning. I want to dive into our Q&A session, and I'm going to start with some of the questions that were already submitted on our CVI Now parent group Facebook page. So you can unmute yourself, stay muted until you want to speak, whatever works for you. So Elsa, I actually think you answered this at the very end of your presentation, but there was a mom who's like full-time working mom here. You know, when a child is in lower phase 2 on the Roman CVI range scale and cannot recognize 2D images, how do I best support virtual learning as a full-time working parent? And it seems like you noted, you know, really collaborating with the parents and understanding the priority, understanding the goals. Anything else you want to speak?
Yes, well, first off, I just want to know, I know how hard it is to try to work, you know, full-time at home and try to teach. So I just kudos to you. You're doing a fantastic job. That's all, in case no one has told you or not told you enough. That's all. But yes, exactly. Just, and again, I don't know your child, so I don't want to speak specifically, but it's really trying to make that, really using the 3D images or 3D materials, 3D objects to make more connections about what's being presented on the screen, and letting the TVI know what your or the whole team know what your priorities are right now. Since I'm assuming just the way it was worded that maybe the student is home the majority of the time, if not full time, and you're also working full time. So there's only like a much smaller window of time that you have to work with your student just because of everything else that you're doing in your life. So if you only have so much time, like what's your biggest priority of what your student needs to learn, you know, in your opinion for your child? So just don't feel like you have to do every single goal that's written on the IEP, because you can't be every single teacher. So just creating your priority list and collaborating with the team to get all the support that they can still provide to just do that priority list instead of every single thing.
I love that. You know, we all felt the pain of losing our kids' entire team in an instant back in the spring and March. So being able to adjust to that's been really hard for a lot of us as parents. Next question is, my child's special education class, which is virtual now, uses a lot of choice boards, using all pictures and videos. All are difficult, if not impossible, for my child to see. Sometimes I think a blank screen is better and to have her just listen. What are your thoughts?
You can go ahead, Emily.
I think with this, you know, just speaking kind of generally, I would always monitor behaviors and seeing where your child is showing kind of behaviors that seem like it's too much. And you as the parent would know what that too much looks like, and then trying it the way that you're thinking of reducing the complexity, turning off the screen. And if you see an improvement, then I think that would be an answer for you. But kind of using as the parent, if you're seeing that behavior, go with your gut and kind of try it. And then if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But if it does, then you tried it. Megan?
You pretty much said exactly what I was going to say. You're the parent, you know best. Do what you think is right. And then you could try, you know, if your student's just listening, you could try something like what I incorporated, making some kind of object that works along with the choices. So working with the teacher to find out in advance if it's changing weekly or if it's something that'll be going on for a month. And even just picking 1 or 2 objects to have for your child to use and to be able to interact with and make a choice with that way could maybe be a simple way to kind of eliminate the not being able to make a choice like their peers.
That's so helpful. How should the parent advocate for their child with the team about this need? Like in terms of questions to ask, in terms of saying, this isn't accessible. What's the best way for the parent to kind of speak up and collaborate and try to do a team problem solving method?
I think one way you could try would be, depending on how each class works so differently. But like with my class, we tend to have a monthly theme. So we'll use the same activities with just a little bit of a change each week for the whole month for art and for cooking and for reading and things like that. So maybe use the collaboration time. And if you're not getting live collaboration time, request that, and maybe request to go over for the week before the new month starts. What is the plan going to be? What are you thinking of doing? And how can we make it work? Because the last thing we as teachers want to do is make more work for you. So whatever we could do on our end, I was trying to send out weekly or monthly updates on materials that we would need so you could get them ahead of time. But ask for that, ask for a preview of what's going to be happening in the next month. So you're not just in the moment saying, oh, this isn't accessible. What I wish I knew in advance. You could try to kind of cut that off at the pass.
Nice, thank you. All right, let's move on. So question is, having a visual of both the teacher and the lesson too visually confusing? Should the teacher only use a PowerPoint via shared screen and not themselves be visible? What about viewing other classmates? Zoom can be overwhelming for people with CVI. What are some best practices? Which we kind of covered, but good question still.
I know for my students, and again, my students aren't live, so this doesn't quite answer this question. But I did, for some of my students, I recorded a PowerPoint, and I had played around in the beginning, played around because I was trying to get more tech savvy. So I thought, ooh, I'll record a PowerPoint and they'll see my face so they can see my face just for fun. I don't know. But then, so I tried it all out and it just looked so visually confusing to me, which is exactly what I had done it. Because you can record on Zoom, of course. So it would be exactly what a live session would look like. I opened up Zoom. It was just me on Zoom. So you saw my face and then I shared the screen. So it'd be a PowerPoint. So it's again, just what a live session would look like. But I ended up figuring out how to do, you can just record on a PowerPoint and save it as a video file without my video face, because I found that a lot less visually overwhelming. Because if I wanted them to just focus on the images, like that was to me the most important. If they're going to learn anything, is to look at the image, not to look at my face. That's not the most important part of the lesson. But it all depends. If they're doing a live lesson, then I don't know how, maybe I'm not tech savvy enough. I don't know how to have the teacher not be, she can turn off her video, but the teacher would still need to be present during the Zoom lesson. Yeah.
I'd like to touch on the part, what about viewing other classmates? I think that's extremely student specific. I have one student who CVI late phase 2 gets upset if it's not in grid view and they can't see their classmates, because they know and they've learned grid view means these are my friends and they're on the screen. And even though that recognition, the detail isn't there, I think just knowing these squares are my friends kind of has an emotional tie. So I think it's almost that social interaction that they need in a sense. So maybe, I don't want to give any specifics, but just asking, do you want to see your friends or not? Or even scheduling times. If the teacher has like a break period and it seems like they're kind of just chit-chatting, put it on grid view then, because then it seems like a natural time where you would see your friends in class. Or if it's an instruction period, you would want the student focused on what's being shown. So I think kind of gauging it that way might be a method.
I love that. And it just goes to show every kid with CVI has their own specific and unique needs. I know Henry liked the grid view if there are only 3 people maybe, but beyond that, if we were on grid view for too long, he just like walked away. So that's the hard part about, virtual learning. He could just get up and walk away, and then getting him back to, engage back in the learning when he's already made up his mind, it just sets off a whole string of behavior. So many stories, I'm sure, that parents have with CVI and remote learning. There's a big question about what AT devices are preferred for virtual learning for students with CVI. It's a big one.
For me, for AT devices preferred, I always revert back to assessments. If there's been an AT assessment, if it has been done in the past, or how recently it's been done, what were those recommendations? How can those be executed in remote? If it's an adapted keyboard, a certain resolution, a certain screen size, things like that. And then also looking at the specific adaptations for Chrome, iOS, iPad, the accessibility features. All of those websites and like operating systems have detailed accessibility and how to go through and change the font. So all of the font on every page is X size, how to change the mouse, screen readers, things like that. But I would refer back to if an assessment's been done and what that assessment showed.
Thank you. Yes. All goes back to assessment always to meet the specific needs for our kids. Now there's a specific question about boom cards. Megan, you have experience with this, right? Are there any teachers making CVI appropriate boom cards? Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about that since this was a parent question?
Sure. So I had no idea what boom cards were before this started. I had no idea. But I saw it all over the teacher blogs and things like that too. And I kind of played around with it. And it was really student specific. I mean, as most of what we're doing is, but I actually used them to make a CVI friendly for this specific student math lesson to work on subtraction. So I actually have an example I can show you. Just to get a little idea of what. So how it works, the screen on the left is what she would see first, and we're working on a simple subtraction problem of 6 minus 4. And she could either use a mouse or a touch screen, and as she touched each of the balloons, the red circle would appear through it. So that was kind of similar to what we were doing live. She would physically cross things off and then count them. And then when she chose the correct answer, then it went to the next screen and showed the completed problem with them crossed off. And obviously that could be very visually complex for a lot of students, but it happened to work for her. It's, just so student specific. It's really great. You can change a lot of things on it, and you can import different images. You can change the background. So there is a simple way to do it. If you're doing a choice between 2 things, it's a nice simple interaction. But there is a ton of movement on it. So that's one thing I would watch out for, even just switching between each slide. It kind of like the whole screen just flips and there's no way to change that. And there's a lot of sound effects. So I would be hesitant with it depending on the type of learner you're working with. But there is a way to do it for some specific students.
Nice. Thank you for that example. I appreciate it. We have some questions popping up on Facebook Live. So exciting. How many screens are too many? The speech therapist is trying to work with PLQ, and they want 3, 1 for Zoom, 1 for PLQ, and 1 for activities to choose from.
I mean, I can't speak to.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask clarifying PLQ.
Is that pro loquo to go?
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I can't answer for the specific situation. I have tried with a dual screen with an iPad and the computer screen, thinking that it would be great if she could see me on the top and then manipulate things on the iPad. And I found a lot of distraction with that. Just the going back and forth, but like up and down and side to side between two different screens is a lot for anyone visually. So I would just be hesitant with that and just watch out for visual fatigue.
Yeah, and also it comes to mind is just what, again, the assessment says about the visual behaviors when it comes to complexity of array, complexity of, when there's visual clutter, and visual fields as well is what comes to mind. So really honing in on what the assessment reveals about this child's unique vision. Anything else you want to add?
What were the three? The proloquo, the activity. I think what was the third one? Just this.
One for Zoom, the PLQ, and one for activities to choose from.
If it's just the teacher, for example, that's all that's on Zoom. He might not necessarily need to see the teacher. Because I have only one student who is doing us 2 devices right now. I've never progressed past 2. But he's doing it for a different, like he needs to see the teacher on one screen just so he can see the teacher signing. And then the other screen, so pinned, both of them are Zoom. On one screen, the teacher is pinned while she's signing, and on the other screen, it's the shared screen that the teacher is presenting. So I don't know, I was thinking for another student, like maybe if the teacher is showing something in one, and then like whatever she's showing, if it's a worksheet or something that needs to be manipulated in the second screen, but that you have to really think about how much the shifting of gaze, having to follow the auditory processing, the visual processing, there's just so much that goes into play with, and then if you have a third screen as well. So yeah, really go back to the assessment and see if that would be appropriate. I don't know, I've certainly never tried it for any of my students, so I can't speak to it, but it just seems like it would be perhaps a little tiring for myself. That's all.
Yeah, that's good advice as well. That's great. Yeah, and you don't always have to have the three screens in front. One, the Zoom can just be the teacher to be able to view what the child is doing from behind, right? Yeah, cool. So many things to think about these days. There's a quick question. Would the PowerPoint books that have been adapted be available to families to use? So maybe just asking about the examples that you showed, if you want to share an example or two. Maybe we can put those up on the site or something like that. We can look into that.
The only thing would be, I would assume, copyright issues.
Right.
With using the books. I mean, I'd be happy to share or just at least how to make it simply.
Ooh, love that. Let's do that. That'd be great. And there's a lot of how-tos on paths to literacy and such, but yeah, if we wanted to bundle it with this event, that'd be really great. Oh, one just popped up here. So, I think we answered this. If a child cannot recognize 2D images, what can you do to support a remote environment? And we talked a lot about bringing in 3D, making it a multisensory and rich experience, really collaborating with the parents to understand priorities and goals and using what's in the home to base instruction. We're going to be having some content dropping on the website all about examples for instruction based on home routines and instructional considerations for CVI and remote learning. So you'll get some ideas then. And I guess to end, since, it's already almost 5 and we all got to go back to our lives. We know that multisensory experiences and experiential learning is really key in brain development, in growing those connections, in growing our visual memory and recognition. So how, if each of you just want to touch upon how do you incorporate multisensory instruction even in this virtual space?
I'll start. Sorry, Ilsa. So one thing that comes to mind is, as we were saying, making it really personal. So picking an activity, usually a preferred activity. So one that I did before was for the sun protection when it was nice and sunny in June. So the multisensory was for sunblock. The student wore sunblock every time they went outside. So using their own sunblock bottle, having them smell, doing the lotion. So getting used to, ooh, I put it on your arm. Can you put it on my arm? So getting that tactile input, recognizing the bottle. Then we would use like non-sunscreen bottles as a visual, like, oh, this one is not yours, this one is yours. So smell, the click, the tap, just feeling it. So that was the first one that came to mind, is making it personal, something they do every day, and just using every sense that they would use.
For me, it was more making videos for families on how to incorporate it in home as well. So I mentioned before that I liked making how-to videos because I thought that would be a good way of training families on new things as well that they can incorporate during this time. So one thing I like to do is do a lot of, along with the students' OT, kind of collaborate together and create a co-video on active learning and CVI. So those are really fun on how to do, you know, definitely things that the families had in the house, but, you know, like kitchen utensils, not like knives, but like spatulas and, you know, spoons and things like that, that maybe the student might not have access to as often, depending how much you do family cooking at home, but the student might not feel those textures that much or know where they're located in the kitchen. You know, you can make a whole experience out of it, and just incorporate them into, like, incorporate the student more into the whole cooking experience, or just cutting up different fruits and vegetables and laying them out and having them feel them, and or doing a bin on all, this is on past literacy, I believe, but a bin on all different music toys, or all different sized balls, whatever is you know, motivating to the student, and depending on what array they can handle, of course, that they're touching different things, they're, you know, making those connections, those, you know, it's all about comparative thought and concept development and all those things that can be tied together while, you know, having a multisensory experience with, again, really easy things that is just in their playroom or in their kitchen that everyone has. So that was really fun for me.
One of my favorite things, my co-teacher and I did weekly cooking lessons. So it was kind of a cool way to address some IEP literacy goals. And we would usually make a pre-recorded video of us showing how to do it. And then, you know, give an outline of how to carry it over at home. And again, with really simple things, you know, we didn't want to be going through a bunch of ingredients, but getting the students to interact with the different smells and tastes and textures, even if they're just playing with it, and trying to incorporate a lot of the same materials each week, like, oh, the big mixing bowl and the wooden spoon. So they're using it over and over again. And some of the families have gotten so creative with it, you know, using it, kind of tweaking the lesson to make mashed potatoes because that's what they were making for dinner that night. Or, you know, right now we're working on smoothies, and one of my students blended her own food for her G-Tube feed on Zoom the other day, which was such a great idea. You know, we were using fruit, but she needed it so for her own nutrition, and it was so creative on her mom's part, and just a great way to tie everything together. And kind of like a fun way to incorporate siblings into it too, because a lot of times, you know, you have to keep your other kids occupied too. So.
Oh my gosh, such incredible examples. It just goes to show maybe a little bit of a silver lining is that we can really dive into those expanded core curriculum goals. We can really dive into those independent and life skills while working in the home. Well, yeah, this has been really, really exciting. Really wonderful questions, really wonderful insights today. I really want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our panelists, Megan, Emily, and Elsa. We're so grateful for your time today and all you do for our kids with CVI. It's really incredible. Thanks for leading the way. Everyone take some time to check out our 3-part series on CVI and remote learning on cvinow.org. In the next couple of days, 2 articles on instructional approaches for CVI and remote learning will be live on the site. So make way for that. Thank you to everyone who joined us live and have a great evening. Bye. Thank you so much for watching this event brought to you by CVI Now here at Perkins School for the Blind. Go to cvinow.org to learn more.